As y'all may or may not know, I've been working on writing something up, writing a series of essays that will eventually be a longer piece, which are dedicated to a certain thesis, and that thesis is that the end of the Cold War in between the United States and the Soviet Union, culminating in the defeat of the Soviet Union and the end of communism, was what essentially opened the floodgates to the movement that's afterwards been known as variously as political correctness, PC, SJWism, or today it's most often just gets called wokery or wokeness or wokeism. This all started. There was not a trace of this sort of thing. I mean, there were liberals, there were people with liberal ideas who got offended by people expressing, you know, ideas that were counter to their ideas, but they didn't form this powerful clique amongst the power elite with the power to use, you know, tons of money, billions of dollars, and coercion to force certain behaviors, as somebody once recently said. The CEO of a certain company once recently said, and but all that whole thing didn't start until the Cold War was over, which is, I'm saying the date at 1990. Berlin Wall came down in '89. The Soviet Union was basically over in all but name by 1990. So my thesis is that there was time to dedicate you know, more men and material, as they say in wartime, because I think it is a war. They've shifted the war. They were focusing the war outward for the duration of the Cold War, because the elites, the inner sanctum, the truly powerful people needed to flatter and massage those they looked down on as the hoi polloi, to get them to you know, potentially serve as cannon fodder in case the Cold War got hot, and to win the Cold War. But once the Cold War was over, once the Soviet Union was defeated, then the war turned inwards. Now, what I'm talking about in this, what I'm going to talk about here, you see all kinds of connections with this. It kind of unlocks. It's a key that unlocks the door to and makes certain things fit together that you didn't previously see the connection. And I'm an admirer of the author Bret Easton Ellis. I do like his work. He wrote the novel American Psycho. He finished it in like in the late '80s, and turned it in, according to his own testimony here, as we're about to hear, in January of 1990. They had solicited this from him. They asked him, "Do you have something new for us?" Because his first two books had been bestsellers. He said, "Yeah, I think I'm going to write about a Wall Street broker who's also a serial killer." And they according to Ellis, they said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. That sounds like a really good book." But they didn't know that what he was going to write would end up being American Psycho, which is you know, a very let us say provocative and challenging read. Although I think it's a good book, and I think, you know, it's obviously made a huge impact on the culture. But Simon and Schuster, as he says, they as we'll hear him talk about here in a minute, in 1990, that crucial year 1990, they kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and then finally at the end of the year they told him, we're not going to do this. We don't want to do this. And they announced that they rejected American Psycho because of out of taste. Was what they said. Now, I'm going to hear. We are going to hear directly from Ellis here, because I think what he says is interesting and important in the context of all of this. So
they seem to take the book literally. They seemed to believe that a depiction of violence is an act of violence, a depiction of misogyny is an act of misogyny. They read it wrong. And so they canceled it. And they fired me. And they couldn't take back the advance that they'd given me, the money they'd given me. They asked me to write the novel. They said, what is your third novel? And I said, it's about a young guy who works on Wall Street who happens to also be a serial killer. We love it. We love it. That's all I told them. And they gave me a ton of money to write this book. Well, a ton of money in 1987, 86. And I had a couple bestsellers before, so anyway. But I think they thought it was going to be a different novel. I think they thought it was going to be a more traditional novel, and I think they thought it was going to be maybe have a more traditional detective, and maybe there was a girl in trouble, and that the killer would be caught, and that order would resume. And I didn't write that kind of novel. I was consumed with trying to find a way to portray madness on the page.
Okay, all this is interesting, and I'm going to I'll put the link so you can see this whole. I think this is a part of a longer interview, but I'm just going from this portion of the interview where they're talking about American Psycho. So he talks about how he thinks they misunderstood the book, and that's why they rejected it. But in a minute, he goes into some other things that I want to elaborate on with respect to the thesis that I'm writing about right now.
How do you portray insanity on the page without going all Stephen King or whatever? Is it through obsessive repetition? Is it through noticing only all the clothing and what everyone's wearing? Is it that is kind of original, hasn't been done, and it's reflected in Patrick Bateman. So anyway, the book was canceled. It was picked up by a better publisher, but I also, because of the controversy and the contents of American Psycho, I was canceled by 31 publishers around the world. They all dropped me. Every single one dropped me except for one, Picador. Picador in the UK was the only publisher who kept me, but I lost every single publisher. And as my agent said, we had to start again.
So this is, I'm just following up on what he said just there. This was like a lemming-like behavior from publishing companies, that all of a sudden after Simon & Schuster rejected Ellis's American Psycho, and it was picked up by another company called Knopf, which wasn't as big of a company, but was still willing to publish the novel. He was then dropped. He talks about it as being canceled. Back then, people didn't talk about being canceled. That wasn't in the terminology. I mean, you would hear about TV shows getting canceled or events being canceled, but you wouldn't hear about people getting canceled. But he's using today's terminology to talk about what happened to him after he wrote this book, which was obviously a very politically incorrect book. And also, a difficult read, a book that is quite brutal in places, but nevertheless, I think the fact that all these companies just one after another, 31 companies, he says, just dropped him, and he said, I guess these were people that he had written for. He was he was a young writer who achieved success at a young age. So he was a hot commodity, but after writing American Psycho, he became a pariah. Now, why was this? Why did this happen with this particular book? Yes, the book is, would maybe be controversial in any age, but he happened to write this book at exactly the time when political correctness kicked in. He wrote it at exactly the flex point. He finished writing the book at exactly the flex point, which is 1990, between the end of the Cold War and the inception and metastic growth of political correctness. And I say metastic deliberately because it is cancerous. So, moving on.
With the new book.
What was they were so afraid of? Was it their own image or reputation?
Of course. But
Here's
this was
the
at the
important part.
beginning of something else that was happening. Corporations were buying publishing houses. Corporations were buying up publishing houses and studios and entertainment systems. Gulf and Western, which owned Paramount Pictures, also, we found out, owned Simon & Schuster, my publisher. The corporation did not like the controversy. The corporation did not like the contents of the novel. They did not like seeing some of the more gratuitous sexual and violent scenes of the book taken out of context and put into magazines that vilifying me as the Prince of Darkness, evil literary bad boy, or whatever they called me. The corporation thought it was bad for their image. They didn't like it at all. And so they then told the publisher, who, look, admitted it to me, look, I'm so sorry. This is not my decision. I'm going to have to take the fall for it because they don't want it to make it look like it was their decision. They want it to make it look like it was the publisher's decision. I got to take the fall. I'm going to read a statement. I'm going to say it's my idea. But it was the corporation that owned the publishing house that canceled your book because they just didn't understand it and they didn't like the contents.
Okay, that's interesting. What he said there, just to repeat, or just to give my own spin or take on his words. He said that this just happened to be around a time when corporations were buying up book publishers, and so they weren't just these individual entities who could act independently anymore. They were subsumed under these much larger bodies, these corporations, and it was, wokeness, political correctness, administrative feminism, pushing this kind of performative virtue signaling, anti-male, anti-white kind of material. That was it and continues to be a very corporate thing. Now that seems counterintuitive. I know we would think that corporations wouldn't want to do that. You would think there would just be radical groups on the fringes who'd be interested in that kind of rhetoric. But the thing is, it's the corporations that are co-opting this radical rhetoric because they have an agenda, because it's the beginning of the war. The war against Soviet Russia is over. Now we declare war on the West. We, the leaders of the West, we, the deep state, the military-industrial complex, the corporate military-industrial complex, whatever you want to call this group of elites. It was a redeployment of the war in a different direction, and it was a war now against the people of the West, normal people in the West, masculinity, femininity, people who prefer to stay within their own racial group, or just not to vilify one racial group, egregiously. Now it was all, just pushing this anti-white, anti-male, anti-heteronormativity agenda. And it all started up in the 90s. It gathered steam through the years. It didn't all start at once. But the way that Ellis is talking here, with the corporations buying up the company that had published him before, and now making it so that he can't publish this third novel, and the company has to take the fall. The book company has to take the fall and say, we chose to do it. But the real reason it happened was because the corporation said, we don't want this. Let's see if he has anything else interesting to say here about this subject.
So, in a weird way, you could also say maybe that was the best thing that ever happened to you, Bret. Maybe that was a great thing. I actually was young enough to be resilient to not give a shit. I really didn't care. I did notice a lot of schadenfreude among my writer friends who are my age, who told me, this is just a terrible thing. You're never going to be published by a mainstream publisher again. You're probably not going to get any writing gigs for a year and a half, which is true. No magazine approached me. No one came near me. I was fine.
So, yeah, it's an interesting... I'll leave the link to it below if you want to watch the rest of it. And I think it's part of... Like I said, I think it's part of a larger interview. And he's a very engaging person to interview. So, but I just wanted to hone in on, for my purposes, to hone in on the fact that this book, American Psycho, which was very provocative and pushed certain buttons, and made an anti-hero out of this rich white preppy guy who murdered women and used racial slurs, and there's lots of material in that book. I mean, that's definitely not it doesn't suit what the architects of the new America, of the new normal. It doesn't suit what they want to have put out there at all. Even though a lot of it is satire, even though it's not supposed to be read, in any kind of the character of Patrick Bateman is not supposed to be seen as a good guy or anything. His acts aren't supposed to be glorified or seen as justifiable in any way. But still, the very fact that this kind of stuff is getting out there. You saw this in 1990 and thereabouts. You saw this interlinking between radical feminist groups and corporate interests. You saw the co-opting of radical ideas, certain types of radical ideas, specifically radical feminism, and also anti-white ethnic activism, black activism, and so forth. Anything that worked to vilify whiteness, and anything that worked to vilify masculinity, maleness. And so I think Ellis was just caught in the crossfire here. He didn't, and he has some knowledge of, he got hip to the fact that the corporations were taking over. But what I'm suggesting is that maybe there's more even to the corporations taking over, and the agendas that they were pushing deliberately. That maybe it wasn't just a we're concerned with our image thing. Maybe it was more of a we reject this because of ideology sort of thing. That's what I suspect anyway. So let me know what you think. And by the way, if you're interested in my thesis, I posted the last couple things I've written on Substack regarding my 1990 thesis. So you can read it there. And that's it. Thanks for watching.